Imagine standing at the doorstep of justice only to be told you don't belong just because of your color. Would you turn away, or would you fight for what's right? Lena Walker, a young black lawyer, stood in front of the grand courthouse. She could feel her pulse racing beneath her skin, not from fear, but from determination. Today was the day she had worked so hard for. Months of preparation, late nights, and long hours had all led to this moment. She clutched her briefcase tightly, filled with documents she had carefully organized. Her thoughts were on the case, the arguments she would present, and the justice she knew she could win. She thought of her mother, who had always told her to stand tall, no matter what. "No one can take away what you've worked for," a mother would say, her voice filled with pride. Lena smiled at the memory. She straightened her shoulders and lifted her chin, feeling her mother's strength carry her forward. As she approached the courthouse steps, she noticed 2 white police officers standing at the entrance. They were tall, broad, and stern, watching everyone who entered with sharp eyes. Lena paid them little attention at first, but just as she stepped onto the first stone stair, one of the officers moved into her path. He was big, taller than Lena by a good foot, with a face that looked like it had been carved out of stone. His hand, large and rough, shot out in front of her, blocking her way. Lena stopped, confused. She blinked up at him, her mind racing to understand what was happening. "Can I help you?" Lena asked. She was a lawyer. She had every right to be here. The officer didn't move. His cold, emotionless eyes stared down at her. "You can't go in," he said flatly. Lena's brow furrowed. "Excuse me. I have a case today." "I'm a lawyer," she explained, her voice rising slightly, though she tried to remain calm. Surely this was a misunderstanding. But the officer's expression didn't change. His hand stayed firmly in place, like a wall that she couldn't pass. The second officer, standing nearby, shifted his weight slightly, as if he was ready for trouble. "You need to step back," the first officer said, his tone sharper now. Lena felt a knot of tension tighten in her chest. She couldn't understand why they were stopping her. Lawyers didn't get blocked at the door. She had her badge, her paperwork. Everything was in order. Why were they treating her like this? "I don't think you understand," Lena said, her voice firmer now. "I have a case inside. I need to get in." But the officer didn't budge. "Not today," he said, his lips curling slightly, almost like a smirk. Lena's mind whirled. Why were they stopping her? Was this because she was a black woman, standing in front of a courthouse with the power to fight for justice? Her heart pounded harder, anger mixing with confusion. She had worked too hard, come too far to be stopped now. Lena's heart sank as the officer repeated, "You're not allowed in here." His voice was cold and final, like a door slamming shut in her face. Confusion swept over her, clouding her thoughts. She stared up at him, her mind scrambling to make sense of the situation. "I'm a lawyer," Lena said. "I have a case today." She could hear the disbelief in her own voice, as if she was trying to convince herself this was just a mistake. Any second now, the officer would step aside, and she could walk into the courthouse like she had planned. But he didn't move. Instead, his lips curled into a sneer. "Step back," he ordered, his eyes narrowing. Lena could feel the weight of his stare pressing down on her, as if he expected her to shrink away, to turn around and leave. But she wasn't leaving. Not after everything she had worked for. Not after coming this far. Before she could respond, the second officer stepped forward. His voice was lower, more menacing, as he said something that made Lena's stomach twist. "People like you don't belong in a place like this." For a second, the world seemed to tilt. Lena's breath caught in her throat. Did he mean because she was a woman? Because she was young? No, the truth hit her hard. It was because she was black. Her hands trembled with a mix of anger and disbelief. She could feel the heat rising in her cheeks, but she fought to stay calm. Years of law school and courtroom battles had taught her how to keep her emotions in check, how to stand her ground even when everything inside her screamed to fight back. "What do you mean?" "People like me," Lena asked. She stared straight into the officer's eyes, refusing to let him intimidate her. She wouldn't back down. Lena's heart pounded in her chest. She could feel the eyes of the people around her, the bystanders who had stopped to watch, but none of them spoke up. She was alone, standing on the courthouse steps, facing two men who thought they could decide where she did or didn't belong. Her mind raced. Should she call someone, demand to speak to a court official, or should she walk away and come back with a fight no one would see coming? She didn't know what was happening, but one thing was clear. This was more than just a misunderstanding. It was an insult, a challenge, and she wasn't going to let them win. Lena's frustration boiled over as she stared at the officers who refused to budge. "I want to speak to a court official. Right now," she demanded, her voice echoing against the stone walls of the courthouse. "I have a right to be here. I'm a lawyer, and I have a case today." The officers exchanged uneasy glances. They had expected her to back down, to retreat quietly, but Lena wasn't going anywhere. She could see the tension building in their stances. Maybe they hadn't expected this kind of pushback. The taller officer opened his mouth to say something, but Lena interrupted him before he could speak. "This is my right," she said, raising her voice. "You can't stop me just because you think I don't belong here." She could feel her mother's words echoing in her heart, reminding her to always stand up for herself, to fight for what's right. The anger inside her mixed with a deep sadness, knowing that even after all she had accomplished, there were still people who saw her as less than. But she wasn't going to let them have the final say. Just as Lena felt herself teetering between rage and despair, a voice from the crowd rang out. "What's going on here?" Lena turned to see a tall, imposing figure walking toward them with purpose. It was Judge Anderson, one of the most respected judges in the city. Her sharp eyes flickered from Lena to the officers, her face stern and unyielding. The crowd hushed, recognizing the authority that Judge Anderson commanded. "Officer, explain why this lawyer is being stopped from entering the courthouse," Judge Anderson demanded, her tone icy. Lena's heart sewed. She had seen Judge Anderson in court many times, always admired her strength and fairness. If anyone could resolve this situation, it was her. The officers shifted uncomfortably under Judge Anderson's gaze. The taller one cleared his throat, looking down at his boots before muttering, "We were given orders, ma'am." Judge Anderson's brows furrowed. "Orders? What kind of orders?" The officer hesitated, then glanced at his partner before speaking again, his voice lower this time. "We were told not to let her in." Lena's breath caught in her throat. Judge Anderson's eyes flashed with anger, her voice rising. "Who gave you these orders?" The officer hesitated, then said something that shocked everyone. "The orders came from inside the courthouse." Lena's mind raced. Why would someone from inside the courthouse, the very place where justice was supposed to be served, try to keep her out? What were they hiding? Judge Anderson's face hardened with resolve. "Follow me," she commanded. Without another word, Lena walked beside her, her heart pounding in her chest. The police officers stepped aside, clearly unsure what to do now that the judge had intervened. As they walked through the courthouse doors, the heavy air of authority settled around them, but Lena's mind was spinning. What could be going on inside? Why were the police given orders to stop her specifically? Judge Anderson led her to a small office just off the main courtroom. Inside was a clerk, shuffling through papers. The judge's sharp eyes landed on him immediately. "Mr. Garrison," she said, her voice cold as steel. "We need to talk about the case Lena Walker is working on." Mr. Garrison flinched, his hands trembling as he set down the files. Lena felt a pit grow in her stomach. Something was wrong. She could feel it. She stepped closer, her eyes scanning the room. On the desk in front of the clerk, she noticed a familiar stack of papers, her case files, but something was missing. "Where are the rest of my documents?" Lena asked, her voice breaking through the tense silence. She reached for the files, her fingers shaking as she sifted through them. Important pieces were gone, evidence, testimonies, crucial information that could win the case. Mr. Garrison looked cornered, sweat beading on his forehead. I don't know what you mean," he stammered, avoiding eye contact. Lena's heart sank as the truth slowly unfolded before her. She looked up at Judge Anderson, her throat tight with anger. "My documents have been tampered with," she said quietly, though her words carried the weight of her growing outrage. "Someone's trying to sabotage his case." Judge Anderson's expression darkened. "Who's behind this, Garrison? You'd better start talking." Garrison swallowed hard, his eyes darting nervously around the room. "It wasn't just me," he whispered. "There are people in high places who don't want certain cases being handled by—" He hesitated, glancing at Lena. "Lawyers like her." Lena's blood turned to ice. This was more than just about her being stopped at the courthouse. It was a deliberate attack, a cover-up to keep her from representing her clients. The case she was working on involved a powerful company that had been exploiting a poor, mostly black community. They didn't want her to win. They didn't want the truth to come out. The weight of the revelation hit her like a tidal wave. The police, the courthouse staff, even people inside the system were all working together to block her. It was a conspiracy to protect the rich and powerful, and it seemed like she was standing alone against it. Lena's heart ached with a mixture of shock, anger, and sadness. She had always known the world wasn't fair, but this was beyond anything she had imagined. They were willing to destroy her case, smear her reputation, and stop her at the courthouse doors just to protect themselves. For a moment, doubt crept into her mind. How could she fight something so big? Was this battle too much for her to win? She had come so far, but the system seemed rigged against her. She thought about walking away, letting it go. Maybe she couldn't change anything after all. Lena clenched her fists, determination flooding back into her veins. She wasn't giving up. Not now, not ever. This was a fight she couldn't walk away from. Lena took a deep breath, steeling herself. The injustice she had uncovered was more than she ever could have imagined, but she knew she couldn't back down. Judge Anderson stood beside her, a solid force of support. "We're going to expose this," the judge said firmly, her eyes blazing with the same fire Lena felt inside. With Judge Anderson's help, Lena gathered the missing documents, tracked down witnesses, and pieced together the truth about the corruption within the courthouse. Together, they brought the evidence to light. The powerful company, the crooked court officials, and the complicit police officers had all worked together to ensure that Lena never made it inside the courtroom. But they hadn't counted on her persistence. The story broke in the news. Headlines read, "Lawyer prevented from entering court. Corruption uncovered." People across the city were shocked and outraged. The injustice wasn't just about one case. It was about a system that had tried to silence her and the voices of the people she was fighting for. Protests erupted outside the courthouse. The community Lena was representing rallied behind her, their voices loud and determined. The courthouse was forced to investigate the officers and officials involved in the scandal. One by one, they were removed from their positions, exposed for their part in the cover-up. Lena's case moved forward. With the truth on her side, she presented the evidence and won the case, ensuring that the company responsible for harming the poor community was held accountable. The victory was bittersweet, not just because of what she had gone through, but because she knew this fight wasn't just about one case. It was about standing up against a system that had been broken for too long. Lena became a hero in the eyes of many, not just for winning her case, but for standing up against the corruption that tried to shut her out. People across the city spoke her name with admiration and pride. She hadn't just fought for justice, she had become a symbol of it. But even as the dust settled, Lena knew this was just the beginning. The system she had battled was deep-rooted and complex. She had won one fight, but there were many more ahead. One day, as she sat in her office reflecting on everything that had happened, a letter arrived in an envelope with no return address. Lena hesitated for a moment before opening it. The letter was short, written in a hurried hand. "You've done more than you know. Keep fighting. A friend." Lena's heart swelled as she read the words. She didn't know who had sent it, but it didn't matter. The message was clear. The work wasn't finished, and she had more support than she realized. She folded the letter carefully, placing it in her desk drawer. The battle for justice was far from over, but Lena was ready. With renewed strength, she stood up, knowing that no matter how hard the system tried to stop her, she would keep fighting. For her clients, for her community, for justice, and she knew she wasn't alone. If you found Lena's story inspiring and want to read more gripping tales of justice, perseverance and courage, make sure to subscribe now. Don't miss out on powerful stories that will keep you on the edge of your seat. Be the first to receive exclusive content, updates and more.